and welcome to the GITEX Tech Waves Podcast. This is where we bring you the latest trends and innovations in the shifting tides of tech worldwide. Now, I'm Georgia Tolley, and we are coming to you currently live from the Dubai World Trade Center. We're on day 5 here of GITEX Global, the biggest tech show in the world, and there are literally thousands of people on site here. Fortunately, we have persuaded one of them to come and join us in our mobile studio, and I'm delighted to say that our guest now is Albarah Elkhani. He performs a very senior role. He is Senior Vice President of Operations for M42, which is, of course, one of the main sort of government organisations here that is involved in the health sector. Really fascinating industry, fascinating company. Really lovely to have you join us in our studio. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, as you can imagine, my main topic of conversation is going to be artificial intelligence. Literally, it has been the overarching theme here at GITEX Global this year. I think it's quite possible it will be for the next decade. Obviously, in your industry, health, it's playing a huge part. It's sort of shifted this focus onto preventative healthcare, hasn't it? How big a game changer is it going to be for that sector?
I think it's a very important question but I just want to maybe step back a bit for a second, just to give you the context of why M42 was created. M42 was a merger between two sort of giants within their own domains. It's a very unique type of situation we're in because we had Mubadala Health, that was the quality healthcare provider of tertiary care and all sorts of clinical care within the sort of healthcare industry, both locally and regionally. And bear in mind, that's healthcare provisions. And then on the other end, we had G42 Healthcare, that is a health tech enabled institute that was looking at how artificial intelligence can play a role in improving healthcare outcomes and also making it more efficient and accessible to more people. So more of an equitable healthcare provision. When we looked at healthcare in general, we found that healthcare is providing sort of services for disease, for patients with disease. And we wanted to change that narrative, and we wanted to look at it more from a prevention, prediction, and a precision perspective. So we weren't looking at just patients, we were looking at people. We weren't looking at disease, we were looking at prevention, and we were looking at precision as well. So this is sort of the narrative of where we came from as M42 and bringing these two powerhouses together.
It's really interesting that there was that shift in mindset. And of course, it's great that the UAE was sort of at the forefront of that shift in mindset. So do you now find that one of the most important components of preventative healthcare is this use of artificial intelligence?
Absolutely, because the whole concept is, how do you pull insights from the mass amount of data that's been generated in all its facets? So as a healthcare provider, if I use a small example, a standard lab test, like a complete blood count, a basic lab test that most of our patients would have when they go into a hospital provision, has more data points than an entire MRI scan has, for example. So it sits on a mass amount of data. If we look at the genomic data, for example, with whole genome sequencing, that has over 3.2 billion data points. So just imagine that amount of data that you have to interrogate and then pull insights off. It's humanly impractical to be able to do this within a specific period of time. Another example, it took us over 50 years to go from a whole genome to sort of that cost $1 million to perform to where we are today. And we only understand about 5 or 6% of this whole genome within the clinical domain. So without artificial intelligence, we can't accelerate the sort of findings of what we have and bring all these data sets together to look at how we can predict and prevent disease as well.
So how are you actually doing that? You described there a little bit that you're analysing the blood test in a little bit more detail, that you're managing to get into genomics in a little bit more detail. But how are you actually sort of leveraging that information in a practical way?
So if we look at integrating data sets, is probably the most critical element. So if we look at what we call genotypic, so what we inherit from our parents genomically, and phenotypic is what we have in sort of the clinical disease outcomes. What diseases do we have? How do we correlate those two together and say, okay, what risk do you have of having these type of diseases moving forward? And we're privileged to have what we call the polygenic risk score. So we understand now the risk stratification of our society and say, these people are more prone or a higher risk for a cancer or at high risk for a chronic disease, and then proactively managing that. A new sort of initiative that was launched by the Department of Health in conjunction with the Emirati Genome Program was a premarital screening. This, in its essence, is actually eliminating disease before it happens, because by bringing these two genetic pools together and understanding the hidden risks to the offsprings, what you're able to do now is educate the couple, and then if they want to continue with the marriage, you offer them IVF services. So now you're actually stopping that rare genetic disease from happening before it even happens. That's just one small example where AI and data is bringing back to the community on predicting and preventing disease.
That was such a fascinating policy that you mentioned there, that was introduced on the 1st of October for the entire Emirati population. And what's so fascinating is that in the pilot study, it was only about sort of 86% of couples were absolutely fine, but those 14% of couples could really be helped. I mean, that's a properly life-changing situation there, thanks to the use of artificial intelligence and that genomic knowledge. There's also this sort of element of being able to, if you do get sick, if you do get ill, is AI going to help with personalising medicines? And is that something that you guys are preoccupied with?
Absolutely. If you look at traditional medicine, we conduct clinical trials to understand. So first of all, we identify a target. So we understand that someone has a potential disease. We try to find out what that target is. And then we look at all the molecules that we have established that can treat that target. There is over 10 to the power of 60 molecules available to us. And I don't even know how many zeros that is, right? So there's a significant...
Did you say 60?
60, yes. 10 to the power of 60.
Yeah, that's a lot of zeros.
Exactly, a lot of zeros. So bear in mind, then it takes 10 to 15 years to go from discovering a target to bringing a medicine into the market to be treating patients. So what AI can do now is it can scour that sort of 10 to the 60 database of molecules and really start simulating what the best targets are and find out that very quickly. And then once you find out what the targets are, you can very quickly look at it in the human modeling through simulation using AI. When traditionally you would take that medicine directly from an animal sort of clinical environment to a human model, and then eventually go through all the phases of a clinical trial and go into drug discovery. But the point is, a lot of these medicines fail during these stages because we don't understand the human biology, which is very different than the animal biology. They might work in the animal model, they might not work in the human model. AI is allowing us now to simulate the human biology, understanding what most likely will work in a human before we go into that clinical trial, or what wouldn't, saving a lot of time, effort and money, therefore allowing us to hopefully reduce the cost of medicine, also to expedite maybe 3 to 5 years instead of 10 to 15 years to bring a medicine to market.
How about the technology and how you're actually using it to develop in life sciences and transform the healthcare sector through the life sciences route? How would you describe life sciences first? So
life science is an ecosystem of discovering a target, as I described, all the way into producing a medicine. And what is associated with all those elements of finding that target. So we have, I would say, slightly unique approach to life sciences. So most, let's say, life science traditional methodologies are looking again at what the genetic makeup is affecting the human being and sort of all the pathways in between. So what we call transcriptomics and proteomics and all those elements. We're also looking at what's causing that disease as well. So we're looking at the environmental factors that has a causative action on that target. Because what happens is there's a very scientific terminology called methylation, which means that the gene is being switched on or off. What's causing that gene to be switched on or off is typically an environmental factor. And no one has really got down to the crux of which particular environmental causative agent is causing those genes to turn on and off. We want to get to a stage where we can combine that environmental data that we have through multiple programs like RASID and Abu Dhabi Quality Conformity Council, the genomic data and methylation, understanding the trigger points. Once we understand those trigger points, then we can very much effectively look at the targets and the treatment for those targets. A very different way of looking at life sciences than traditional life science. Another really exciting initiative that was launched by M42 recently in partnership with the Department of Health Abu Dhabi is the Abu Dhabi Biobank. So you launched that back in May. The idea behind this is that it
collects the stem cells from the umbilical cord of newborns. What type of medicine does that help you with?
So we have two main factors at Abu Dhabi Biobank. One is the cord blood bank, which you just referred to, collecting the stem cells. And the other one is called pan-human, which is more specific to the life science strategy, which I'll come to in a minute. So the cord blood bank, the essence of it is collecting stem cells, which are our primary cells. So in a human being, we have specialized cells, muscle cells, nerve cells, and other cells. And our primary cells are the stem cells that differentiate into these specialized cells. So by keeping these primary cells, we can utilize it for treatment of leukemia, for example. So significant blood disorders has clinical therapeutics used today using the stem cells. So these are very serious diseases that if we have a public bank that has stem cells available, exactly like a blood bank does, when someone goes into an emergency surgery and requires blood transfusion, there's a public bank available to offer that blood to that patient. We want to do the same with cord blood bank stem cells under the auspice of the Department of Health, hopefully allowing for these treatments to be more available and accessible for our communities here in Abu Dhabi and the region as well. Now on the pan-human side of things, our main driving factor here is to enable the life sciences within Abu Dhabi and the UAE. And one of the, let's say, the key enablers was to have these biological materials stored with all the data that we described previously. So we can work with international collaborators, scientists, that they can come physically, see the specimens, do the experimental work on those particular types of specimens to hopefully have a better outcome and a quicker sort of drug discovery pipeline.
You can see that through that type of resource, the UAE could quite quickly become, a centre of biotech, for example, which I imagine is, part of the strategy in many ways. Now, we've talked about how M42 is working for the betterment of people. You've outlined several different strategies. But I understand that you're also sort of working and using AI for the betterment of non-human entities. That's an interesting phrase. What does that actually mean?
So I gave you a stat previously that a human genome is 3.2 billion data points,
yes.
Correct? Do you know what a plant genome would be?
I'd hope it's less. I hope we've got more.
It's at least 5 times more.
5 times
right.
more?
So we
but
can
we're
go...
more complicated.
Exactly. So because there's more chromosomes, more data to analyze. So if you look at a human genome, 3.2 billion bases or data points, a plant can go up to 50, 100 billion. So very complex genomically. And we believe, again, in the One Health strategy that was set out by the WHO, which is basically that anything that is consumed or interacts directly or indirectly with a human affects a human. So through our different programs, and one of being our wastewater analysis program, because unfortunately, while it's crude, anything we expel as a human being as well is typically what's gone through us and affected us. So if we analyze what's the outcome of that and see what's inside this type of material, then we understand what's affecting us as humans. So the only way we can really do this is using our AI to help us with correlate these data sets through machine learning or large language models, that LLMs like Med42, both in the clinical and non-clinical domain, that can grapple between all the different guidelines globally and understand sort of how we can interpret this data set in a much more simple and meaningful manner. But our aspirations is to be able to bring all these data sets in one place using the AI tool to both help in non-human and human. One of the areas we significantly focused on is the GAF tree. Now the GAF tree is a tree that grows in the middle of the desert here in the UAE. It's one of the local trees that grows in the middle of the desert. And no one really understands how this tree thrives in a very harsh environment. So if by understanding the genetics of the GAF tree, we will hopefully find the triggers of resilience. By understanding the triggers of resilience, we can support in the agricultural domain, make the UAE a much more of an agricultural thriving industry, because we can find the genes that support resilience and living in these harsh environments through understanding the GAF tree.
It's a hugely exciting sector. It's one of those topics where the mind boggles slightly of the various different use cases. An absolutely fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us in our studio. Albarah Elkhani, another absolutely fascinating interview. And of course, if you would like to learn about more trends in tech via the GITEX Tech Waves podcast, make sure you subscribe. And if you want to find out about the latest episodes, just go to our social at GITEX Global.